Okay, so far in this chapter we've looked at the equations of a straight line. So previously we've already talked about slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. And as far as graphing when it was in that form, it's very easy to do, because if I have an equation like y equals 1/2 x plus 2, I know that the y-intercept is going to be at where y is 2, and my slope for that line is 1/2. So using that information, it makes it really easy, like I said, to graph this, where I just plot a point where the y-intercept would be, and now I can use the slope to find my other points, because my slope would be 1/2, so I'm going to rise up from that point and go to the right 2. Up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2. You go backwards by going down 1 and to the left 2. Down 1 and to the left 2. So we get, oops. So that's how we can graph our straight line. Now, in our previous lesson, we talked about equations in this form, ax plus by equals c. Well, today in our notes, we're going to look at how to graph equations when they're in that form. Now again, just like we've already talked about, you don't have to write this in your notes. You should already have this. That standard form of a line is ax plus by equals c. And the graph of that is obviously going to be a straight line. Now as far as how to graph these in the form ax plus by equals c, the easiest way to graph it is to use the x-intercept and the y-intercept. Now it's important to realize what the x and the y-intercept are. Now you might already feel like you know this, but let's talk about it anyhow. The x-intercept obviously means where it crosses the x-axis. The x-intercept is always going to be where x is some number and y then is 0. The y-intercept is obviously where the graph intercepts or crosses the y-axis, and that's going to be the coordinate where x is 0 and y is some number. Now we can use that fact to help us find the x and y intercept very easily, because again, to find the x-intercept, that means that x is some number and y is 0. So to find the x-intercept, we're going to put 0 in for y and just solve the equation for x. So if I want to find the y-intercept, knowing that the y-intercept is where x is 0 and y is some number, I'm going to put 0 in for x and solve that for y to figure out what the y-intercept would be. For example, here we have the equation negative 5x plus 2y equals 10. If I want to graph that using its x and y intercepts, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 0 in to find the x-axis, x-intercept. I'm going to put 0 in for y. Now if I put 0 in for y, well, 2 times y, or 2 times 0 is 0, so I'm going to ignore that for right now. Oops. So as a result, I have negative 5x equals 10. If I divide both sides by negative 5, I get my x-intercept is negative 2. So that means where x is negative 2, y is 0 is going to be one of my coordinates. So that's going to be over here. Now if I want to find the y-intercept, I'm going to replace x with 0. Now notice I didn't cover up the plus there because I want to recognize that that's a positive 2y. That equals 10. If I divide both sides by 2, I get my y-intercept is a positive 5. In other words, that's where x is 0, y is 5. Plot that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is right here. Connect with their line. Make sure to add arrows to the ends of both of these, and don't just go through, don't just stop at those points, because this line continues in both directions. And there's your answer. So why don't you do the same steps to graph this next equation? So pause the video and check your answers in a minute. Okay, again, what we can do to figure out the x-intercept is replace y with 0. In essence, that means that we're going to ignore the y there. So now I have 3x equals 24, so that means x equals 8. So my x-intercept is 8 there. To find the y-intercept, I'm now going to replace x with 0, so that means I can cover up the x, but don't cover up the minus 4, or the minus that's with the 4, because obviously that's going to be extremely significant here. So I have negative 4y equals 24, leaving me with y equals negative 6. Now a little note on scales here. Obviously with the way this graph is set up, counting by ones is not going to work. So what I have to do is I have to change the scale. I'm going to count by twos. If I'm going to change the scale for the x-axis, I need to make sure that I make note of that. You don't have to write it down for every single one. Sometimes it makes that easier so you don't have to sit and count once you have the axes labeled. But at least show me what the first spot is going to be. What that tells me is that you're counting by twos here on the x-axis. We're going to need to do the same thing on the y-axis, so make sure you do the same thing on the y-axis. You can put above the line and put positive 2 if you wanted, or below the line and put negative 2. So that way I know that you are counting by twos. Otherwise, if you don't change the scale, I just assume that you're counting by ones, and then I'd mark it wrong if it doesn't look right. Okay, so x equals 8, so 2, 4, 6, 8, there's my x-intercept. My y-intercept is negative 6, so negative 2, negative 4, negative 6 would be down here. And there's my line. Okay, so this technique that we just did does not work when A, B, or C is 0. Because if A equals 0, then I'd have just BY equals C. And if that's the case, I'm not going to have both an x and a y-intercept. I'm going to have a horizontal line. So there's only going to be just a y-intercept, no x-intercept there. If b equals 0, that means I have something in the form a times x equals c. And if that's the case, it's going to be a vertical line. And since there's no y-intercept, so there's no y-intercept, so it's just going to have an x-intercept. And the slope, by the way, is going to be undefined. Remember we talked about that the other day. So let's look at these. It says, is this graph of a line? X plus 0, y equals 3. Yeah, it's a graph of a line. Another way to look at this is to be in the form, since 0 times y is nothing, it would just be x equals 3. Meaning it's going to be a vertical line going through the point where x equals 3. And so no, it's not a function, because vertical lines are not a function. With the next one, 0x plus y equals negative 2, this is the same as just looking at y equals negative 2. And yes, this is a graph of a line. So let's graph it and see if it's a function. So this is going to be a horizontal line going through where y is negative 2. And obviously, yes, that is a function, because it passes the vertical line test. Now we're not going to do this next section. Instead, what we're going to focus on is this. If I have an equation in the form ax plus by equals c, and I'm asked to find the slope, we're going to find a really slick way to be able to find the slope without having to rewrite our equation each time to be in slope-intercept form. But for right now, that's what we're going to do. We're going to rewrite this in slope-intercept form and see how A, B, and maybe even C are going to affect the slope of the line. So what we're going to do is, well, slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. So to get it in that form, I want to get the y by itself. So I'm going to start out by subtracting ax from both sides. So I'm left with by equals, I'm going to write this as negative ax. That's a positive c, so plus c. Now I want to get the y by itself, so I'm going to divide everything by b. Now the key here is I'm going to divide everything by b. So I could write this as y equals negative a divided by b times x plus c divided by b. So as far as my slope, what's my slope for each of these? My slope is going to be the opposite of a over b. So if I'm given an equation like 4x plus 2y equals 6, and I'm asked to find the slope, slope is going to be the opposite of a over b. A in this case is 4, so the opposite of that is a negative 4. B in this case is 2, so my slope here would be negative 2. If I wanted to find the y-intercept, notice how the y-intercept is c divided by b. 6 divided by 2 turns out to be 3. And actually that ties into what we even did today, because the y-intercept would be, if I replace x with 0, that would be a positive 2y equals 6, and sure enough 6 divided by 2 gives me 3. So using this to find the y-intercept isn't that helpful. However, using this to find the slope, the opposite of a over b, is going to make things extremely helpful whenever we're asked to find the slope. So that's where we're going to end. So good luck with your assignment.